Okay. All right, so I think maybe we'll just get started with preliminaries and introductions, and of course I will admit folks as they join in. Just so everybody knows, this is being streamed on YouTube, so you will be internet famous by the end of this webinar. All kidding aside, I want to, of course, thank Maria, who I will introduce in a moment, and also thank the Florida Atlantic University Supply Chain Management Master's Program. This program is a 30-credit, 10-course program that spans the whole plan, source, make, deliver, and return aspects of the supply chain, available through multiple modes, in-person, online, hybrid flex. In fact, you could sit outside in the glorious sun of Boca Raton and listen to me chat while I'm inside of synthetic air conditioned if you'd like, but nevertheless want to thank them for sponsoring this, and more importantly, candidly, want to thank Maria Villablanca. So looking forward to having this conversation. I would love to have you introduce yourself to our audience if you wouldn't mind. So please, if you wouldn't, thank you.
Great. First of all, hi everyone. I am in the UK, so that's why it's probably a bit dark here for me. I've been based in the UK for 22 years. As Steve said, my name is Maria Villablanca. I am the co-founder and CEO of a company called Future Insights Network, which is a network of about 130,000 senior supply chain leaders across the world. Our network includes chief supply chain officers, EVPs, VPs, director level or above from some of the largest brands in the world. I'm also the host of the Transform Talks podcast, which is a podcast that deals with all things related to transformation of the supply chain. And you can find that podcast on Spotify. So I'm kind of a very lucky person because I get to speak with senior supply chain executives worldwide every single day and ask them some of the most pertinent questions around supply chain. And I have been in and out of the supply chain field since I got my first job outside of university. So that's my background, basically.
Fantastic. Yeah, and we are all the lucky ones, candidly, to have you have a conversation with us today. For everyone who's here, I put Maria's company URL inside the chat, so you can feel free to check it out. In fact, I encourage you to check it out. It's fantastic. So thanks again for being here. So let's just get started a little bit and frame the big picture on what we're talking about. Supply chains have been around since ancient Egypt. They have been the things that have moved products and started the world. But frame it from your vantage point and from what people are telling you about why today supply chains are so important relative to just 3 years ago. I mean, what's your insight on that?
Well, there's something that I like to call my neighbor test. So when I would talk to neighbors, when I'd move in to somewhere or whatever, just chatting with the neighbors next door, what do you do? And I would say supply chain, and you could just see people look at me and just go over their heads. They had no idea what it was. Whereas now, when I say supply chain, people can relate to it. People know, almost everybody knows what a supply chain is, and they have a personal story around it. So they'll say, oh man, I ordered this sofa online and I haven't had it. It's supposed to be delivered 3 months ago and it's not been delivered. Or they go to their local supermarket and man, we're running out of tomatoes. Why are there no tomatoes or no pasta? And so I think people have actually connected the dots finally, the consumer, the man or woman on the street, with what a supply chain is and the importance of it. When I talk to new members of my team or when I talk to people about supply chain, I say it is in everything we touch, we consume, we eat, in medical supplies, in defense budgets, in government. It's in everything. The supply chain is a fundamental fabric of global commerce, and it is not going away. Now, it just seems that you turn on the news and everybody's talking about supply chain. So how has it changed in the last 3 years? In my opinion, supply chain has now been elevated as a conversation to the general public, along with conversations in boardrooms. It's moved away from what was traditionally known as a back office function, something that back in the day was seen as a warehousey, forklifty, dark recesses of logistics, and it was all about trucks and shipping things. Supply chain, and an efficient supply chain, a resilient supply chain, makes the difference between a competitive advantage or not. You look at companies like Amazon that really reinvented the supply chain and gave us this whole 24-hour or even 1-hour delivery for our goods. It has fundamentally changed the way that we operate, whether it's business to consumer or business to business. So as you can see, I'm very passionate about it because I feel that for once, we've got an opportunity as supply chain professionals to bring this to the attention of the world and to dedicate or demonstrate the importance of supply chain.
Yeah, I think that really the transition away from tactical to strategic, right? It being a value creator, not a cost center. That's it. I mean, that's the slam dunk point. So then the thing I think about as it relates to that transition is if it's such a strategic component of the organization, it's obviously being managed to mitigate risk. So when you think about, and you can compare certainly prior to COVID rather to now, what are the biggest drivers that you see of supply chain risk? I mean, that have transitioned it into that strategic role from just being, hey, do we have pencils? Where's that forklift? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, first of all, one of the reasons why I'm here talking to you is because a lot of my network tells me that they still struggle with conveying the value of the supply chain or the function, what's behind the curtain, right, of supply chain in a cross-functional way within their organizations. So there's still a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unknown from, say, someone in finance or someone in the risk department or someone in marketing as to what actually works within supply chain, what is happening in supply chain. So for me to be here and talk to professionals about risk, first we must understand the importance that a supply chain makes to the competitiveness of business today. So without supply chains, the world just does not operate. So now that we've established that fundamental truth and principle, I think from a risk perspective, I wrote a newsletter called The Cocktail of Crisis. So that essentially, as part of my newsletter, was talking about the multiple elements of risk in the supply chain today. So going back to supply chain being a cost center back in the day, well, a couple of years before COVID, it was all dominated by cost. Find the cheapest good, transport it in the cheapest fashion, and get it to the person as quickly and cheaply as possible. Now, having a strong, resilient supply chain is a key core competitive advantage. Okay, so now that we've established those truths, I think it's important to understand that right now, the supply chain world after COVID, we demonstrated the ability to bounce back in a resilient fashion to deal with crisis and uncertainty. Now, this is not going away. So right now, the supply chain landscape in a post-COVID era is dominated by geopolitical uncertainty, the war in Ukraine, China, Taiwan. It's dominated by economic uncertainty. We've just had the Silicon Valley, Silicon Bank right now go under. This is a lot of companies depend on financing and funding. What's that going to do to the economy? We're having supply issues. So people, because of the war, because of the economy, aren't getting raw materials easily enough. There is a chip shortage, and some chips are only manufactured in one place in the entire world. And so that's a huge risk. There is an issue with regards to demand. Now, could you have predicted that during the pandemic, people would be hoarding toilet paper, of all things? So there's an element of chaos, crisis, unpredictability in the demand element. What used to be traditional straight demand doesn't work like that anymore. Then there's climate issues. We're having severe climate issues across the world. The United States, we're seeing it, huge storms and unusual snow in California. That has an impact on the supply chain. And then there's a skills gap. So there are a lot of people not going into supply chain. Young talent is going elsewhere because supply chain has an image issue. So all of those things, in my opinion, create what I like to call a cocktail of crisis that supply chain leaders need to be very much aware of as they plan their supply chains.
Now, if you're thinking about the ingredients in that cocktail, some of them are immediate, some of them are midterm, and then some of them are a slow burn. I mean, if you're thinking about kind of, what's the word, triaging it to a point where you're trying to figure out what we can do to address the problems today versus how we're planning for several months from now, several years from now, which ones do you stand out as the immediate, got to get these done today? Is it the demand? Is it the talent? What is it, do you think?
I think we're getting feedback from someone's microphone,
We
so it
are.
might be good for
I just
like
muted it.
yeah, perfect. So you're right, we can't deal with every single risk right now. We have to deal with the emergency issues. I mean, I used to call it toward the beginning of the pandemic. The companies were trying, actually before the pandemic, and the reason we exist is we realized that supply chain leaders were trying to get their very large scale businesses from analog to digital. Now that might sound pretty obvious, people going, well, yeah, clearly. I've sat in rooms with some of the leaders of the biggest Fortune 500 companies talking about how they're still using Excel spreadsheets. That's a risk. That's a huge risk. The human error element is a huge risk. And so the reason we created this business is to help leaders move from analog to digital and transform their businesses with digital technology. We've soon realized that, especially during COVID, that there was so much stuff going on that it wasn't just about digital transformation. It was about entire business process transformation. It's entire mindset transformation. And so there's something happening right now that is getting leaders in a position where they have to deal with crisis and uncertainty on a regular basis. The black swans. I once had someone say to me, this isn't a black swan anymore. This is like a gaggle of swans. You know, we're now talking about a flock of swans that are hitting us on a regular basis. If it's not COVID, then it's a war in Ukraine, which has affected us in terms of the availability of raw materials. If it's not, transportation, shit stuck in canals, with the ship stuck in the Suez Canal. I mean, there is just a lot going on right now. And so one of the big things that people can do to mitigate this risk is visibility, is to really truly understand their supply chain inside out, backwards and forwards. They need to do that also from a regulatory perspective. If you want to do business in Germany, for instance, you need to be able to demonstrate that all of your suppliers in your tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 are meeting sustainability regulations. So to me, the biggest step right now is to get a handle on visibility of your supply chain.
So that presents a really interesting pivot. And by the way, to everybody who's participating, if you do have a question, we're going to have time at the end for some Q&A. Please pop it into the chat, and then we can go ahead and chat later. But so, Maria, the thing that I'm thinking about what you just said is visibility is critical. I buy into that completely. My dissertation was on that, but it relies on data. And so, it's a loaded question, but I mean, what kind of data are we looking at? What are the sources of these data? How are these data orchestrated? I mean, let's start broad, big picture. What's the role of data in achieving visibility and risk management in the supply chain?
I think data is a fundamental part of not just risk management, not just transforming the business, but getting competitive advantage and surviving in this modern era. The companies that don't have a handle on their data and know how to harness it and use it effectively will not be able to deal with complexity in a fast and resilient way, and B, will not have the competitive advantage of those other companies that can deal with data. So for me, data is the lifeblood of transformation. However, we still have companies on Excel spreadsheet, so I'm just looking at the chat, and we've got someone here who says your company still tracks its overseas shipments with spreadsheets. Well, you're not alone. A lot of people are. So what's the risk in that? It's the black hole of data that worries me. This unknown area where information sits in spreadsheets on someone's desktop. It sits in emails that you sent out to people. It sits in text messages, in little pieces of paper. You still have some trucks that are arriving to places and they have to fill in a clipboard with, information, pen and paper, the old-fashioned way. So there's a mountain of data and information that is sitting in this black hole of unknown sources, disparate areas. there's also think about how an end-to-end business operates from a visibility perspective. You've got multiple disparate sources of software and technology, kind of like if you've built a house one room at a time. I'm going to tack on this room on top of that room and then put this room over here, and then there's going to be a library over there. So it really is just this hodgepodge mess of disparate sources of data that are going in different locations, different directions. You've got marketing data and social media data and et cetera going all over the place. So in order to solve the problem, a lot of companies are creating data lakes, which is essentially a receptacle of data going in from all those multiple sources, whether it's information like the demand signal. Like there's technology now using AI and machine learning where the algorithm can tell you what the demand is going to be based on, say, communication on social media, based on traffic reports through satellites. And all of that helps to move things around and helps to get things to make them visible. So I think for one, creating a data lake, having a data strategy that's in place, having a data-driven leadership is fundamental. You talk about people saying, oh yeah, I want to be data-driven. Well, prove it. How data-driven is your organization? And I think to me, that is one of the most fundamental areas of risk, of overcoming risk, is knowing what you're facing.
The modularization that you're describing, I mean, I'm sure you've seen this before, but how many companies out there look at the requirements of the business, not just the supply chain, I mean, of the business end to end, and then they say, well, we need this tool for this, and then this tool for that, and then it begins to stack on, and then ultimately they all funnel into it's not a lake, it's not a pool, it's like a cesspool of CSV data that you open on a spreadsheet, right? So I'm sure that resonates with a lot of folks. So then let's think about this data in conjunction with the need for visibility. The whole point of it is, and by the way, the transition into it being strategic. If that all taken together, what we're looking for is to establish resiliency, because we know, as you said, there's always going to be what did you say, a flock of swans or a flock of seagulls? No, that's a band. You said a flock.
Yeah, I think a lot of your people listening might not know who the flock of seagulls is anyway. They're not that old like us.
If I had hair, I would do it like them, right? But right, but so this it's
like a flock. It's no longer a black swan. It's like the movie Birds.
Yeah, exactly. So then it's going to happen. We know it's going to happen. Of course, we don't know when, but probably soon. So how do we build resilience? What capabilities do we have aside from that managing data? What are some other things that we can leverage this data for to build resilience into the supply chain?
I think technology is going to be a very big component. So to get a handle on data, for one, to gain visibility, things like digital twins. If we talk about security as well, control towers are going to be a very big part because they help secure the transactions. Control towers are a really big part of that. I think also it's about integrating the data in a way that leads to information that not just builds resilience, because resilience is nothing without responsiveness. So building a resilient plan and saying, okay, we'll be resilient, we'll be able to survive that, or we'll be able to deal with that crisis. It's how do you respond to the crisis, especially with regards to the day-to-day. So let's back up to the pandemic when I was talking to executives who were, by the way, burnt out, exhausted, on constant crisis mode. They were essentially, I talked to a number of different companies. One company in particular I remember was interesting because they had one team focusing on responding to the crisis of COVID. And then they had to break it into a second team to actually deal with the day-to-day business of getting products made, getting products sent, looking at the innovation, digital transformation, creating a digital twin of their supply chain. So I think if we have multiple crises that may happen, that are happening on a regular basis, then you need to find a way to control your data and technology and really harness the power of technology to also make it easier for supply chain people. I just said that they were tremendously burnt out. So if you give the technology the mundane, repetitive tasks, then and the analytics, the information, it gives humans the ability to then really focus on creativity, innovation, and assessing risk, because AI still can't necessarily do that with unknown quantum.
So, okay. So then the resilience with the responsiveness. Now, the other thing that's interesting with that is that the pace or the response time that companies have to be able to react, it's infinitely increasing, right? Their need to increase their time is proportionally going up. So do you think, I mean, is it the control towers that are going to be the big tool for that? Is it the twin? Is it sources of data outside the supply chain, maybe? You mentioned an interesting thing, weather or marketing data. These things are going to influence how they respond. What do you think? I mean, what's going to be the thing that increases that responsiveness? What's going to be the one tool in your mind?
I don't think it's necessarily one tool. I think it'll just be using the power of AI and machine learning across multiple tools. So you can use AI and machine learning for planning, for data, for us data assessment, analytics, visibility. What we're seeing right now is the usage of all of that to create that digital twin model so that you can gain visibility. And like the person who said here about tracking its shipments overseas, everybody wants to answer the whole "where's my stuff" question. Where's my stuff? I'm a consumer. Where's my stuff? I'm a buyer. I'm a supply chain. I'm a manufacturer. Where's my stuff? That's basically it. And if you're still looking at spreadsheets and relying on a person to tell you over there in China and it's closed because of COVID, or it's I don't know, over Poland and it's closed right now because it's nighttime, that's not a way to work. So you need to allow, I think, things like the AI and the metaverse, control towers, all that technology to really communicate with and move away from complexity to complicated. The difference with complexity is just this system I was describing with multiple areas everywhere. And but if AI and machine learning and technology were handling those communications, then it would go from complex to just complicated, but it would still be more robust.
That's a good point. So then all this established, grounded, we're better informed for it. We're going to clean up our data, become resilient. Here's the real question, which is kind of the topic of the webinar. Where do you think the most likely black swan event is going to be, or the flock of black swans? Where will they pop up, do you think?
What's that meme or joke that everybody says, well, I didn't have on my bingo card that we were going to get a ship stuck in a canal, or that we were going to have this black plague, or whatever. I think we're right now in an era of instability. So without delving in too much into the arena of history, but since the World War II, we've had relative stability as a globe, right? Aside from localized problems. There might have been a problem there, might have been a problem there, but at a global level, there really hasn't been something this big. Since COVID, we've had COVID. We're having the threat of potential war that is a global war again. That's very real. You've got economic issues daily, interest rates and inflation at levels that haven't been seen in a very, very long time. Climate change, that's real. That's today. That is having an impact on supply chain. So to answer your question of what's the next black swan going to be, my answer back to you is take your pick, man. Take your pick. There's going to be many. The question isn't so much what black swan event is coming. The question in my mind is, are we prepared? And is the supply chain leader or business leader now prepared to be economist, geopolitician, risk manager, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all of those things at once in order to understand their business and respond?
I hadn't formally put together that comparison, but it's a really astute one when you match up the cultural and economic chaos that was going on leading up to World War II, and then the opposite of that until recently. That's fascinating. So goodness. Okay. Well, until then, at least we have kind of a supply chain immune system that you've outlined, at the core of which is that data-driven methodology to be able to simulate, predict, hopefully mitigate the chaos. And really importantly, I think as a takeaway, training and getting folks involved with and having this next generation come up and learn about supply chains, and be trained by people like you who talk to people every day about this kind of thing. I think that's so critical. Before we get into any Q&A, if the audience has any questions, please feel free to pop those in. But any final thoughts or comments, Maria, that you'd like to just drive home?
Well, given the fact that we're talking to people, I'm talking to a university, I think I would like to end this part on that skills gap. Supply chain makes the world go round. That's how I started here. And I'd like to reinforce the value that supply chain has as a profession, something of such great influence in the world and in the economy, in, you know, even helping people. I once thought, I once introduced a company, a pharmaceutical company, to this really massive exporter in Africa, or importer in Africa. And as a result of that, vaccines were able to get there. And I thought, man, I had a hand in helping make something that good happen, purpose-driven. So I think it's important for people to realize that they do need to, that going into risk and understanding supply chain is a worthy and noble cause. And we need to address that skills gap and get more people, more diverse people with diverse backgrounds, thinking about answers to these questions that are still unknown.
It's a good point too, because man, you know, you think about what types of fields that you can go into. You can, just like you talked about, you can do the import export or the distribution on the logistics side of things. You can focus on procurement and sourcing strategies, managing the supply base, direct, indirect procurement. You've got so many options. So it's really great to hear someone in your position advocate for that. And again, those of you who are on, I encourage you both to subscribe to Maria's newsletter and check out her website, both of which are in the chat. It's been fun since I've been following her on LinkedIn. I've learned a lot, and so it's been really great in that regard. So while we're waiting for any questions, if there are any to come in, again, I'd just like to thank the Florida Atlantic University Supply Chain Management Program. It's a fabulous 10 class program, 30 credits. I'm the director of that program, so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat. Maria's contact information is, I'm sure, somewhere on her website, or you can access her, I'm sure, on LinkedIn, as I do. Yeah, so we'll just wait for some questions. I'll pop my email in the chat for anybody who might need it. That's great. Also, just so everyone knows, Maria is a fellow Floridian, for those of you who are in Florida, but now currently lives across the pond diagonally
In the UK.
up over.
Yeah.
So, and you said you grew up in and around Miami area, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm from Miami, so
right.
Which is very weird considering that I live in the UK. And as I was saying to you, Stephen, before the webinar, I'm much paler these days than I was when I lived in Florida. So yeah, so I am a Florida person. I love Florida. Grew up there, went to school there all the way up into my early 20s, and then moved abroad. So I go back there from time to time.
That's great. Well, I hope the next time you are in town, we can get together, or at least dinner or something, for doing this for me. So I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right. I think we've got a question here. Let's see. What is a black swan? That's probably a good point to address. Maria, do you want to hit that one?
I think the best way to think about a black swan is it's such a rare occurrence of an event that it is unpredictable. So it's something that is basically catastrophic, that has the possibility of an impact that is so great on anything that we couldn't predict it. So a black swan event is just, we couldn't predict this situation. I mean, maybe there's a better technical term for it. And Stephen, you probably have a better risk associated term for a black swan. But for me, a black swan event is just one of those things that we couldn't have predicted, that has the capacity to have an impact across major areas.
Yeah, that most people would say that. I think Talibi in the book, he said that it was a incredibly high impact, low probability event, right? So something that's going to be, as you said correctly, catastrophic, but the probability of it is so low that no one could have reasonably predicted it with any degree of certainty. So yes, that's exactly right.
Correct.
But the thing of it is, right, with these black swans is you're right. You said it best. Take your pick. I mean, there's going to be an unlikely event that occurs somewhere whose impact will be catastrophic. So that's why I thought this topic was so critical to address this, because these are the things you can do universally, not just specific to logistics. I mean, you said it best, Maria, right? Data-driven solutions apply across the board. So yeah, absolutely.
And I think if you look at the fact that, say, for instance, Ukraine is the #1 exporter of sunflower oil, of wheat, of elements that go into creating, say, chips. So you may not be feeling it right now, but if this war drags on any more, we're going to start to see a situation where you're not going to find pasta in the supermarkets, or if you are, it's going to be some weird alternative with no wheat. You're not going to find bread in the supermarkets. So that is real. And that's what people are trying to combat right now, the shortage of materials. And that's what a supply chain leader is doing today, is looking at, okay, I used to make goods this way. What's my backup plan to make them in a different way? So the supply chain, also, to just go back, it isn't just me shipping the goods from a warehouse to you, the consumer. It's also, if you think about, say, my iPhone, my phone, there's like 1,000 component parts that are here that have to go to a factory. The glass is made somewhere. The casing is made somewhere else. The chip is made somewhere else. So what if this chip that I told you that is only made in one place in Taiwan, and then there's a potential war with China, or China invades Taiwan? Well, guess what? You don't get any more iPhones. You don't get any more phones. So that is the reality of what we're dealing with right now.
It's an awesome point. It pivots well into the next question from Randall, which is, I've heard of a skill gap earlier in supply chain management. Can you elaborate a bit on this? What are those skill sets currently needed, and how do students learn them?
That's a great question. And the reason why it's a great question is because if I go back to pre-pandemic, you kind of needed to operate in supply chain either with some sort of STEM degree, so mostly engineering, or work your way up through a business from a graduate program, outside in a big manufacturer, and they all fit a certain model. Fast forward now, and I think supply chain leaders are coming to realize, business leaders are coming to realize two things. One is that model of person, that box that they had for a definition of supply chain professional, just doesn't work anymore. And the second thing is that the problems that we're facing are going to require a skill set that is beyond your traditional. So what kind of skill sets? Lateral thinking, to me, is one of the most important skill sets that students can have. Problem solving, looking at things beyond your traditional methodologies, exploring, having that sort of startup mentality. So I see professionals, or I hear of professionals that are abandoning their old-fashioned criteria. You must have an engineering degree from this university or a master's from this university to go into supply chain. It helps, of course, but if you could be coming from a risk perspective, a finance perspective, an HR perspective, and still move into the supply chain field, because supply chain industry is looking for problem solvers.
No, that sums it up so well, because and this goes to what we were talking about before when you introduced the skills gap, which is to say, you take the supply chain, you break it up, plan, source, make, deliver, return. You can go into any element of that, but the universality to it is you're solving problems on inbound supply, you're solving problems on outbound materials, you're solving problems on manufacturing, you're solving problems on planning for it all. So that's a really great point. Yeah, and I think if I may provide my humble opinion, how do students learn them? There's a number of different ways. I mean, these webinars, the fact that you're engaging on them, those are great. There's a number of Maria's content, you'll get fantastic insights there. There are more formal options, obviously, degrees, much like the one that's sponsoring this webinar, online options around degrees. I mean, you've got a number of different choices. I think the benefit is we've got more options to learn now than maybe ever in the past, right? Which is a good thing, for sure. For sure. All right. Any other questions?
Actually, yes, I think one of my students accidentally directly messaged me, but it's a great question. She says, I have a BAS in supply chain working on my master's in the same. What certification should I complete to make myself more marketable?
It's a great question.
I think in terms of certification, there's so many great programs out there. I think it's more about a couple things for me. Getting some working experience in a startup business would be great, because that kind of environment is so helpful. Working at a manufacturing business would be helpful as well. So getting sort of hands-on experience will be very valuable. Equally, to make you more marketable, understand the tech. So whether it is learn a bit of Python or understand AI and machine learning, take a couple courses in that and see how technology will, will affect things. There's also another element, and that is you can never go wrong with learning leadership skills and understanding the soft skills, the management element, the empathy, the emotional, the EQ, emotional quotient, as opposed to IQ. Those things are in short supply and in high demand for anyone.
Couldn't have said it better. The only thing I might add is that regionally, depending on where you're looking, there's some industry preferred certifications. So if you end up going into the planning roles, a lot of them you'll see job openings that require, this is a US centric example, but they'll look for the CPIM certification from the Association for Supply Chain Management, formerly APICS, the American Production Inventory Control Society. So
I'm speaking at their event in June. So
cool.
Going to events is also a great way to do things. I want to answer a question that we've had here, because I think it's a good one, which is from Ryan. Do you anticipate friend shoring or ally shoring continuing as a strategy to mitigate these black swan events? Absolutely, I do. I think it's a necessity that we are moving towards, but it's also not very quick. So in the early 90s, those of us that are old enough to remember, NAFTA was a big deal, and outsourcing became the norm. We were sending jobs everywhere else because it was a lot cheaper, and that's what the bandwagon that companies got onto. Undoing that, although everybody says they're going to do it, is not easy. You have to build manufacturing plants, upskill people from a technological perspective, from a business perspective. It's not easy at all. But yes, if I were sitting in government right now, that's one of the first things that government officials will be doing right now, is finding ways to mitigate those risks by bringing manufacturing back, by bringing suppliers back. But, and here's a big but, no matter what you do, you're still not going to be able to get raw materials from certain places that you just can't make them. There is just certain like minerals, you can only get them in Africa or in Ukraine, funnily enough. So that is still not going to mitigate risks entirely. We're going to have to see, I think, something else, which is consumer behavior changes. We got to the point where consumer behavior, we wanted something delivered in an hour, customized, personalized in a million different colors and flavors or whatever it is. That's going to change.
Yeah, that's not a sustainable model. But
No.
If there's any other questions, I'll take those, but your response made me think of one. Do you find that reshoring to be a pendulum thing though? I mean, when NAFTA happened, obviously everything went out, and then the internet boom pushed stuff to suppliers that were accessible. And now they're talking about bringing it back. It's almost like the centralized, decentralized procurement conversation. We bring it in, we let it out. We bring it in, we let it out. Do you think that are there any parallels, or is this more of a permanent kind of a thing?
I don't think anything is permanent. I think it's all reactionary. This is just the thing of the moment. And I think that if you are any world leader or business leader, you will be looking at risk assessment right now, given the state of the world, given the flock of swans. You will be looking right now and thinking that this is, and I know I speak to leaders all the time, and they're saying that they are doing, for instance, maybe not, shortening their supply chain. So they may be manufacturing in Brazil and previously getting some parts from China. Now they're manufacturing in Brazil and getting parts from Argentina. So they're reassessing what's called the dual sourcing strategy. So initially it was single source, right? I go, I'm making jeans, I'm going to get my cotton from these people, and that's it. Now they're looking at multiple sources so that you have a backup plan A, B, and C, just in case.
Yeah, it's going to be.
I hope that answers your question.
No, it absolutely, yeah. we could talk about this ad nauseum and for hours, but okay. Any other final questions? Did I hit all of them that were in the chat? Yes, I believe I did. All right. So again, I want to thank you so much, Maria, for taking the time in your evening right now. And this will be up on YouTube. Please, everybody, check out Maria's podcasts, her website, all of which is in the chat. I highly encourage you to do so. And if you are interested in supply chain education at FAU, we've got options to suit whatever it is you're looking for. So feel free to reach out to me by email, letter, pigeon messenger, smoke signal, depending on where you are. I'm happy to chat. Thank you all for joining. And again, thank you very much, Maria. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me.
All right.